Good morning, good creative morning. Woo, look at the crowd, oh my God. I love that this theme is anxiety because I don't have to pretend not to be anxious. It's like, woohoo. Oh. This is my love letter to anxiety. I would not have the creative career I have had I not had anxiety and mental illness to start with. The reason I get to do what I do, I write solo shows and do workshops about living with bipolar disorder and mental illness, and I do creativity and wellness workshops, is because I lost my mind and I embarked on a wellness journey. And anxiety was my gateway disorder, so to speak. It's what I like to call it because it was sort of the first disorder that presented itself before I went into my more deep, more intense anxieties of bipolar disorder and psychosis. So just to begin, how many of you, let's say over the last, 7 days, 14 days, have felt anxious about something? Right, okay. And then how many of you have been hijacked by anxiety sometime in your life where you haven't been able to work well or your thinking's been derailed, something like that? Yeah, so it's a fairly common experience. Anxiety is really powerful. It's a formidable force. It feeds on itself and builds bigger and bigger worst case scenarios. Sort of, will they like me? Will they like what I've done? Will they like me or it? They won't like me, they won't like it. I'll never get a project again. I'll never get another client. I'll never have a good idea, on and on and on and on. Anxiety lives on the edge of success. What I can tell you though is as someone who's lived with anxiety more than I would like to, and as a creative person, this is what I know. The more that you take care of and the better you take care of your mental health, the better your creativity. And the more and the better you take care of your creativity, the more you protect it, the more you cherish it, the more that you dive in without judgment, the better your mental health. And if anyone's wondering if I'm looking at notes, that's because I am looking at notes. So, creativity nourishes mental health, and good mental health nourishes creativity. And first to clarify, we all have anxiety like we saw, but we don't all have mental illness. It's sort of like saying that you can experience anxiety, but you don't have an anxiety disorder necessarily. Like families who have, could be diabetes that runs in the family, there's a genetic vulnerability. And so it's the same kind of thing. And mental health is on a continuum, just like physical health. So you can be in good physical health, poor physical health, fair, excellent. Same thing with mental health. So we all have mental health. You can't get away from it. If you're human, you've got mental health, spiritual health, physical health. So first I'm going to tell you a little bit about my origin story, about how I got to where I am. I didn't even know I had an origin story. It wasn't until Altera said, oh, well, people usually talk about, where they came from, and it's their origin story. And I said, I love that. I feel like I've jumped into being a millennial, at least to relate to a millennial, right? That's so cool. I feel cool, finally, 50 years old, and I'm cool. And then we'll do a couple of interactive exercises. So I perform one-person shows, and I write them about my experience about bipolar disorder, anxiety disorders, psychosis, things like that, and then I do wellness and creativity workshops. But that is not what I intended. What I intended was to be on the big Hollywood screen. So as a kid, I was pretty creative. I think all of us are. I did, the pom-pom animals, paint by number, horse paintings, spirograph, etch-a-sketch. Anybody do? Yeah, okay, so all those things. So my first memory of performing is this. Picture summer, backyard, burnt grass, Edmonton, and probably a lot of mosquitoes. I was about 7, circa 1973, and Melanie Bryan, Christine Lamb. I always think it's so weird that we always remember the last names of our childhood friends, right? I thought Beth Harry was there, but she wasn't, and me. And a very rickety metal swing set. And there's also this gaggle of other 7-year-olds sitting on said burnt, scratchy grass, ready and watching us, ready for the backyard swing set circus act. And just to be clear, I wasn't in gymnastics or dance. I couldn't sing, so about all we had was swinging. Oh, and we had a teeter-totter, but that was just like really painful, so we stayed away from that. But I was fearless. I didn't care how good I was, how high I could swing, or if I could make people laugh. It was just for the joy of swinging in front of our friends, pretending that we were a circus act, dressed in puffy skirts and beat-up paper party hats and my mom's old chiffon nightgowns. It was just for the joy of creativity. And I think for a lot of us, I think especially for professional creatives, I think that we forget the true meaning of creativity. It comes from the word creo, right? To create, to bring something into being, to form out of nothing. So it has nothing to do with talent or quality or quantity. It's what I like to call everyday creativity. So it could be setting the table differently, setting the table, period. Wearing a different top with a different pair of pants. Hopefully you're always wearing pants. It could be, changing up a tried and true recipe, something like that. Everyone can do it, and no one can fail at it. No judgment, no comparison, no apologizing, no shame, no anxiety. And so that whole idea of being able to do that without judgment, to have that true meaning of creativity come into it, when those things, all those things that I just mentioned are absent, that's when creativity flows and mental health flourishes. I mean, that's at least what I've found. And has other people found that as well, when you're able to get out of that headspace? So this is the first interactive exercise that I'd like you to do. So everybody should have a piece of paper and a pen. Does anybody not have one? All right, we'll get some here. Do you need a paper, a piece of paper or a pen? Oops, I'm gonna let you do that so there's no feedback. So I got this exercise from Tim Brown from a TEDx talk. Has anybody watched his TEDx talk? And he got this, he's a designer from IDEO, and he got this from a guy named Bob McKim, who was a creativity researcher in the 60s and the 70s, and he led the Stanford Design Program as well. Anybody else need a piece of paper or a pen? A couple people over here need a pen. One more person needs a pen or a piece of paper. Excellent. Good, 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 good. Everything else is good. Okay, all right. So first, before we do anything, I just want you to notice how you feel. If you... I won't ask you to admit how you're feeling. Although if we want to really induce anxiety and see how it changes, this would be great. Yeah, so if you notice you're anxious or you're tired, or how creative do you feel at 9:20 in the morning? And then what I'd like you to do is I will ask you to turn to a neighbor, and if you find yourself on your own, just turn behind you or lean forward and connect with a person in front of you. And we'll do this exercise all at the same time. And on the count of 3, first of all, I have to say I love this because I see so many familiar faces. It's like being like the youngest kid, but being the oldest and being able to boss everybody around. And I'm an only child, so I've never had that experience. Ha! So on the count of 3, you will have 30 seconds to draw your neighbor. Okay? So everybody turn to their neighbor on the count of 1, 2, 3, go! "15 seconds. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, pens down. And feel free to share with your neighbor. Seems to be a lot of laughing, a lot of sorries. Your nose isn't that big. You're really better looking than that. So the reason I wanted to do this exercise is, how do you feel now? Do you feel different from how you felt before we did the exercise? So just throw out some words of how you feel now. Lighter? Happy? Warm and fuzzy. Silly. Exactly. Great. And so those are all examples of how, when you've thrown out the judge, thrown out the cynic or the editor, that's how creativity flows in the truest sense of the meaning. It's not about how good what you did. I mean, there might be some masterpieces here, I don't know. But it's the fact that you are able to bring originality into fruition. And so what I see is that ability to throw out the judge is a way and a certain kind of creative mindset that allows you to also decrease your anxiety. Let's do this. So I loved drama in high school, and I did a lot of improv. I loved English. But as I transitioned out of high school and into university, I also got really ramped up with an anxiety disorder. And as I entered my university acting program, I also entered a long battle with disordered eating, compulsive binging and overexercising, which also managed to hide said anxiety disorder. And I did well at all 3, really. What I like to call pigging out and over-exercising, and hiding the anxiety, and even the acting. And when I graduated from the program, I seemed to have luck on my side, and I had gotten some acting chops, and I was cast in a locally shot Vancouver series in the 80s and the 90s. So I will now date myself. MacGyver, woohoo, Neon Rider. Oh yes, some people really know that. Oh my God, that's hilarious. Danger Bay. Oh yeah, and I know Donnelly Rhodes just died too. That's so sad. And yeah, X-Files, things like that. But as I was going for bigger and bigger parts, I ran into more competition and more rejection. And my anxiety and my depression grew. And just for a little background around mental illness, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, there's a genetic component. Mental illness runs in my family. So I've got bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression on both sides of my family. And it's sort of like what I said earlier, that when diabetes runs in a family, there's sort of a genetic vulnerability. I call it my genetic leaky valve. So one of the difficulties is that I could not separate not getting a role with the rejection of my essential self, even though that was probably one of the key things that an actor really needs to do, any artist, any creative person needs to do. So whenever I didn't get a role, I always thought that the casting agents and directors were saying that what I had to offer them wasn't good enough, that I wasn't good enough. And what that did was it killed my willingness to risk creatively. And so my auditions went downhill from there. I got less jobs. My anxiety and depression grew. And less jobs meant less money. And with that financial insecurity and the present disordered eating and the anxiety and my self-loathing at the time, it all became just one massive bloated blob of despair. And it became the perfect storm for a psychiatric crash. And the onset of bipolar disorder that's in my family. I went into what's called a psychosis, or a psychotic episode. I also call it a non-shared reality, because I actually think that's a more accurate term, and it's also less threatening. It more or less means that what I was seeing and hearing, other people weren't seeing and hearing. And the things that I believed, other people didn't believe. And you could say that they weren't true, but for me, they were very true. My dad took me to the emergency where I was promptly wrestled by orderlies and strapped to a gurney and got a concoction of something really strong stuck into my butt, so it knocked me out. And I was in and out of the hospital 4 or 5 times over 5 years, and the hospital being the psych ward. And it took those 5 years, and one very naked, very psychotic jaunt down the side street in Point Grey. In the summer, though, I was smart, you know, gotta stay warm, right? Didn't want any frostbite on those little bits. No, not very good. Before I would actually accept that I had mental illness and would accept help. And at the time, I had lost almost everything. I had given up acting, I had to give up my car, I had to stop working, and I moved back home with my parents. They were a blessing. And I really just learned how to manage my symptoms, manage the conditions that I had, and learn to eventually live well. Eventually I did. I went back to work at an office job. I was a receptionist slash marketing assistant. Heavy emphasis on the receptionist part. Actually, heavy emphasis on the slash part, but anyway. But creativity had gone on the back burner. And I felt something was missing. I knew something essential was missing, and I needed to do something creative. Because I think creativity for a lot of us who are naturally sort of at the core creative for our well-being, that it is not a luxury. Creativity is a necessity for our mental health. So I saw an ad for a disability arts festival, Kickstart. And there's a couple people here from way back then. And I applied, asking if I could read excerpts from my book. I was accepted. But I didn't have a book. I didn't even have any excerpts. But it was that need for creativity that cheerleaded me on to saying I could take the leap and I could risk it. So I read at the festival, and it was well received. I saw other reps from other festivals. They invited me to their festivals, asking if it was a show, and I said it was. Of course it wasn't, not yet anyway. But I realized people were really hungry for these stories. So I kept my job, I wrote the show, and then I networked looking for more opportunities to present it and perform it. Then slowly, over a couple of years, I built my business. I got more requests to perform and present, and I got paid. Got paid, period, which was amazing. And I got paid a little bit more. And then I transitioned out of my sort of regular office job in 2001 and started touring and performing and presenting full-time. And I started writing more shows, you know, to keep the product fresh and offering workshops. And it has been the most unexpected and most fulfilling career I could imagine. And I get way more work as an actor admitting that I've been psychotic than I ever did as an actor pretending to be normal. So, you know how I told you that when you take care of your mental health, you'll also take care of your creativity and vice versa? Well, what I found was that when I accepted all the things I needed to do to be mentally well, really, really mentally well, and do them diligently, do them consistently, my creativity flourished. So as I've gone into therapy, gotten strategies to deal with stress, relationships, low self-esteem, self-judgment, you know, learning to set boundaries, getting enough exercise, meditating, getting enough sleep, my creativity has been freed. And this may or may not be controversial, surprisingly, the medication I take, and I've taken medication for a long, long time, which I was really, really reluctant to take initially, because I thought it would thwart my creativity, has helped me be more creative, more consistently, more frequently, with better quality. And medication is only a small part of my wellness toolbox, but it's a really important one. And it's not for everyone, of course, but for me, it is. It gets a really bad rap for some good reasons when it's overprescribed, not properly prescribed, but for me, it has been a really important part, just like exercise and sleeping well and therapy. And as I've been able to be creative through all of this with my creative career, my mental health is maintained because my sense of purpose is fed. And I know that if I wasn't doing something creative, my mental health would not be as robust as it is. So how do we keep mental health flourishing and anxiety at a minimum and keep creativity alive? Because anxiety is inevitable when you're doing something creative. So for me, part of it is just facing whatever's causing the anxiety head on. Also, what it is embracing what is and embracing all parts of me. The messy, the beautiful, the selfish, the compassionate, the cowardly, the courageous, all those things, all the parts that we love and all the parts that we don't love so much. So this next exercise is a quick improv exercise, and it will help you befriend anxiety. It's called the failure bow. Has anybody heard of it? No? Okay, good. Okay. It's a way to sort of get comfortable with the inevitable part of the creative process, which is failure. Because for me, it's not that failure is the problem, it's not failure that stops me, but it's my response to my anxiety about the failure that kills my anxiety. And it starts this whole chain reaction of self-judgment and lack of self-acceptance, and it just goes on. So first I'm going to demonstrate, and then we'll go row by row. What you do is you start and you stand in your best superhero pose, hands on hips, you know, your shoulders back and your chest out, and you smile and proudly say with your hands over your head, "I failed!" And you take a bow, and everybody claps and applauds and cheers. Come on, Jessica, I failed! And I know what you're thinking. Okay, so just go with me on this one. I can see some sort of people going, I'm not participating in this one. Okay, so how about the first 2 rows? I'll just get you to stand. Yes, that won't be all by yourself. You just need to stand, put your things down, feel your feet on the ground, hands on hips, find that superhero inside. Shoulders back. No, yes, face them. Yes, of course. Good idea. Yes, face them. And then smile on your face, hands over your head, and say proudly and loudly, I failed, and take a bow. And the next 2 rows, please. And you can either choose to face either way. Superhero pose, hands on hips, smile, hands over your head, and proudly say, I failed, and take a bow. Woo! And the last group of people, please, stand up, find that inner superhero, hands on hips, shoulders back, smile on your face, hands over your head, I failed, and so the reason why I got you to do that, which obviously you probably won't do in front of a client or something like that, is because I think it's a great way to acknowledge, one, how we feel. You can acknowledge your anxiety, you can learn to befriend it, and it's a way of allowing yourself to put it into a proper perspective and move out of your head and into the present and back into the process of whatever you were doing. Because there's something wonderful about what happens when we learn to really accept everything. There's a natural self-compassion that starts to bubble. And even if we don't believe it, even if we really are crippled by that failure, or we feel that way, that little bit of self-compassion is really what allows the anxiety to start to drift away. So, to end, when you take care of your anxiety, your mental health, your creativity will flourish. And when you allow yourself to be creative in the truest sense of the word, without judgment, without shame, your mental health will also bloom. And this I can promise you, because I know anxiety, I know crazy, and with creativity, I also know acceptance and really good mental health. So thanks.
Oh, thanks.
I feel like I'm at an AA meeting. So yes, and I am a psychotic person from time to time.